Welcome back to the AI Risk Manager interview prep series from Fort Events Academy. Episode 3 is all about the EU AI Act and risk classification, the framework that decides what compliance burden a given system actually carries. Over 6 questions will cover the 4 risk tiers in plain language: the trap of thinking, the recent delay lets you pause your high-risk work, how to actually classify a borderline system like a CV screener using Annex 3 and the Article 6(3) exemption, the all-important provider versus deployer split, and how a firm can accidentally become the provider, how to resolve a classification dispute between legal and engineering under deadline pressure, and finally a behavioral question about delivering an unpopular call without becoming the enemy. Foundational to curveball. Let's get into it. We open Episode 3 on the foundation of the whole act, its risk-based pyramid. A product team needs the mental model before they build. What's tested? Can you lay out the 4 tiers cleanly? Unacceptable risk, which is banned outright. High risk, which carries the heavy obligations. Limited risk, which mainly triggers transparency duties. And minimal risk, which is most systems and is largely unregulated. The strong candidate frames it as a pyramid where obligations scale with potential harm and crucially tells the team that classification is the first thing that determines their entire compliance burden. The trap is reciting article numbers instead of giving a usable decision frame. Voiceover. I'd skip the article numbers and give them a usable picture. The act is a pyramid and the rule is simple. The more potential harm to people, the more the law asks of you. There are 4 tiers. At the top, unacceptable risk uses, things like social scoring or manipulative systems, are banned outright. Below that, high-risk systems carry the real weight: risk management, data governance, human oversight, documentation. That's the tier you most need to understand. Then, limited risk, which is mostly about transparency, telling people when they're interacting with AI or with generated content. And minimal risk, which is the vast majority of systems, like spam filters, with essentially no obligations. The punchline for the team is that classification comes first, because the tier you land in decides your entire compliance burden. To lock in question 1, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 2. Question 2 is the recency landmine, and it's a good one because the easy answer is wrong. The executive heard delay and wants to down tools. What's tested? Do you know the actual status as of mid-2026? The Digital Omnibus reached provisional political agreement on May 7, 2026, deferring Annex 3 high-risk obligations to December 2027 and Annex 1 to August 2028, but it is not yet formally adopted. Until it's published in the official journal, the original August 2, 2026 date legally remains live. And critically, the Article 50 transparency obligations were largely not delayed. They still apply from August 2026. So the safe answer is, don't pause. The relief isn't law yet, and several obligations land this August regardless. A candidate who says yes, relax until 2027, fails this question. Voiceover. I'd tell them that's not safe advice, and explain why carefully. The delay everyone's talking about is the Digital Omnibus, and as of now, it's only a provisional political agreement from May 2026. It hasn't been formally adopted or published. Until it is, the original timeline holds and the August 2, 2026 date is legally still live. On top of that, the transparency obligations under Article 50 weren't meaningfully delayed. Those apply from August 2026, no matter what happens with the Omnibus. If the Omnibus is adopted as expected, then yes, standalone high-risk obligations move to December 2027 and embedded ones to August 2028. But if adopted, is the entire caveat. So my advice is the opposite of pausing. Use the headroom. The harmonized standards still aren't final, and building a defensible high-risk compliance program takes longer than anyone expects. To lock in question 2, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 3. Question 3 makes it concrete. CV screening is the textbook example, but a strong candidate doesn't just blurt high risk. They show the method. What's tested? Do you know that Annex 3 lists employment and worker management uses, including recruitment and candidate filtering, as high risk? And do you know the Article 6(3) nuance that a system in an Annex 3 area can escape high risk if it only performs a narrow procedural task and doesn't materially influence the decision, but a CV screener that ranks or filters candidates almost certainly does influence it, so the exemption won't save you. The mature answer also notes the firm must document and register that determination even if it claims the exemption. Listen for method over label. Voiceover. I'd resist just labeling it and instead show the method. First, Annex 3, the list of standalone high-risk areas. Employment and worker management is on it, and that explicitly includes recruitment and the filtering of applications, so a CV screener starts inside the high-risk zone. Second, I test the Article 6(3) exemption, which can pull a system back out of high risk if it only performs a narrow procedural task and doesn't materially influence the decision. But a tool that ranks, scores, or filters candidates is influencing who gets hired. So honestly, the exemption doesn't save us here and it lands as high risk. And one thing people miss, even when you do claim the exemption, the Act requires you to document and register that determination. So the deliverable isn't a yes or no gut call, it's a documented defensible classification. To lock in question 3, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 4. Question 4 is the provider versus deployer question, and the sting is in the tail. What's tested? Do you know the obligation split? Providers, the developers, carry the heavy load, conformity assessment, technical documentation, the risk management system, registration. Deployers, the users, carry a lighter but real set, use the system per instructions, ensure human oversight, monitor it, keep logs, and run a fundamental rights impact assessment in some cases. Then the role flip. Under Article 25, a deployer who puts their own name or brand on the system, substantially modifies it, or changes its intended purpose can legally become the provider, inheriting the full provider obligations. So a strong candidate flags that integrating or rebranding a vendor system is exactly how a firm accidentally becomes a provider. That's the judgment the question is hunting for. Voiceover. There are two roles here with very different weights. The US vendor is the provider, and providers carry the heavy obligations: conformity assessment, technical documentation, the risk management system, post-market monitoring, and registration in the EU database. We'd be the deployer, and deployers have a lighter but genuine set of duties. Use the system according to the provider's instructions, ensure meaningful human oversight, monitor performance, keep logs, and in some cases, complete a fundamental rights impact assessment. Now the part that catches firms out. Under Article 25, if we put our own brand on the system, substantially modify it, or change its intended purpose, we stop being just a deployer and legally become the provider, inheriting that whole heavy load. So before anyone customizes or rebrands the vendor tool, I'd map exactly whether our changes cross that line, because accidentally becoming the provider is a very real and very expensive surprise. To lock in question 4, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 5. Question 5 is the advanced stakeholder conflict scenario. Two credible functions disagree on a genuinely borderline call with deadline pressure. What's tested? Do you resolve it on the merits and on defensibility rather than on who shouts loudest or what's most convenient? The strong move is to make the classification decision a documented, evidence-based one, walk the Article 6(3) test together, ask the decisive question of whether the system materially influences the outcome, and where it's genuinely ambiguous, lean conservative, because the cost of underclassifying a high-risk system dwarfs the cost of over-complying. Crucially, whatever you decide, the determination gets documented with its reasoning so it survives an examiner. And the role-appropriate point. This is exactly the call the AI risk function exists to own and adjudicate. Avoid both rubber-stamping engineering to hit the date and siding with legal reflexively. Voiceover. I'd take the heat out of it by making it an evidence question, not a turf war. I'd get legal and engineering in the same room and walk the Article 6(3) test together against the actual facts of the system. The decisive hinge is a single question. Does this system materially influence a decision about a person? If the answer is yes, the exemption is gone and it's high risk regardless of the deadline. Where it's genuinely borderline, and some cases honestly are, I'd lean conservative and classify up because the cost of undercalling a high-risk system in fines and remediation and reputational damage dwarfs the cost of over-complying. And whatever we decide, we document the determination and the reasoning behind it so it's defensible to an examiner later. This adjudication is precisely what the AI risk function exists to own, not to rubber stamp engineering to hit a date, and not to reflexively side with legal either. To lock in question 5. Avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates. And hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 6. We close episode 3 with the behavioral curveball, tuned to classification work specifically. Classifying something high risk is genuinely unpopular. It adds cost and time, so this role lives or dies on delivering hard calls without torching relationships. What's tested? Conviction and tact at the same time. A strong star answer is specific. A real system, a real high-risk call, real pushback, and shows the candidate explained the why in business terms, not just cited the regulation, offered a path to get to compliant rather than a flat blockade, and kept the team as a partner by bringing them into the reasoning early. The best answers also show they were proven right, or at least that the decision held up and that the relationship survived. Avoid the martyr who was technically correct but left scorched earth, and avoid the people-pleaser who softened a call they shouldn't have. Voiceover. I'd use a real example in star form, a specific system I had to classify as high risk over a team that wanted it to be exempt, with a real deadline and real frustration. 2 things made it work. First, I didn't hide behind the regulation. I translated the call into their language, the fines, the liability, and the rework they'd personally own if we shipped it misclassified and a regulator disagreed. Once it was their exposure, not my rule, the conversation changed. Second, I never just said no. I gave them a path to compliant, sequencing the high-risk obligations so they could still ship on a realistic timeline rather than stopping dead. And I brought them into the reasoning early, so by the end it felt like a decision we were defending together, not a verdict I'd handed down. The classification held up, and, just as important, they still bring me in early on the next build instead of routing around me. To lock in question 6, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. That closes episode 3. In episode 4, we move to AI risk frameworks and methodology, NIST AI RMF, and ISO 42001.